Welcome to the Start Well podcast. I'm Dawn Thomas, your host. As a mother, financial advisor, and researcher, I know the importance of empowering young people on their financial journeys. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, or the coolest aunt or uncle, join me in exploring how impactful conversations about money can shape a young person's future. Let's harness their superpower of time and your superpower of influence to ensure they start well and continue to live well into the future. The information discussed in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal and financial objectives and situation. Before acting on any information discussed here, you should consider its appropriateness, having regard to your objectives, needs, and financial position. Welcome to Season 2 of the Start Well podcast, and do we have a treat for you this episode? We have the wonderful James Wrigley. He's such, a big figure in the financial planning world, in the general public itself. I had one of my colleagues ask me, are you going to start fangirling over James when you start speaking to him? And luckily, James is so easy to speak to. It just feels that you can cover all these really important financial topics. So he's on today. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm a pleasure to be a guest on your podcast. I'm excited to have a chat with you.
Yeah, the tables are turned, James. I know you host your podcast, and it's a treat to be able to pick your brain about how retirement concepts, things like superannuation, you've released your book, how that could actually flow in with our Start Well audience. So before we get into it, just for our listeners who are maybe not aware of James, which I find it quite hard to believe, James is a seasoned Australian financial advisor with nearly 2 decades of experience helping people plan for life and retirement with clarity and confidence. He is a principal advisor at First Financial and one of the country's most followed finance content creators, with a following that's in the hundreds of thousands. In 2025, James released Retire Life Ready, the book that we will be discussing today. A straightforward, story-rich guide that demystifies retirement planning and helps readers identify what they already have, what they may need, and how to get there with confidence. So, James, when you wrote this book, it's a huge thing to do. Congratulations. Who did you have in mind? Like, I kind of assumed that when you're writing this, you were kind of picturing someone that was going to pick it up. Who was that?
I was picturing a very typical client that we would engage with in our ordinary financial planning journey. And so like the process of writing a book, you kind of come up with the idea and got to try and map it out. And I was getting all too kind of bamboozled in my head. I think I was making it too complicated than what it really needed to be. And talking through with the team at Wiley and the editors and so forth, I just said, look, why don't I just follow the process that I do with any other ordinary client? And what are the things that I wish that they knew about coming into these meetings? Because there's certain things that you go through the time and time again, you're explaining certain people, people thinking they're in a really strong position or they're not in such a strong position as what I would think they are as a financial advisor. Or sometimes the table's turned and I'm saying, naturally, you're in a far better position than what you actually think. And so it's just kind of taking the readers on the journey that I typically would in a one-on-one financial advice engagement, that we do over a series of different meetings. It's kind of following that same process. And then when I thought about writing the book in that way, it actually just came so easy. It was type. Okay, what would I talk about next? All right, now I'd be wanting to get into the detail of this is how super works, or that's how super, taxes and so forth. And so then just type, and you've got to, before you know it, there's a whole section of the book. So it was aimed towards, I was writing it with, in my mind that there's someone that's starting to plan their journey towards retirement, and what are the things that we would normally be talking to them about through the financial advice journey. That's how I wrote the book.
Yeah, and look, it comes off like you're sitting with a financial advisor. I suppose for people who are not aware of working with a financial advisor, I feel the book brings you into explaining those concepts, like how you would be. It reminded me a bit of like the way that Mark Bynum approached The Money Sandwich, because I think it's a different, like finance books written by financial advisors are different because you are kind of replicating those gold conversations that happen in, your in your office, like
Yes.
you talked about Wendy. We've all had a Wendy in our lives. And I felt that it was so approachable. Like, it's really a refreshing. It just tells you what you need to do to go along without getting things overcomplicated. And I think that's testament for you understanding what people actually want to hear in a manner that they can understand. Does that come like that easy to you to kind of translate it to the online world? Because it looks easy. I'm sure there's a lot behind it.
So it comes easy to me now, yes, but I think it's the near 20 years worth of practice and experience. Like you talk to, I talk to some of the younger people in First Financial that are coming through, like some of the younger advisors and so forth, the associates and whatnot that are a bit earlier on in their career than what I am. And they look at things, and I think about people that were ahead of me. It's like, how it seems so easy for them, and they just had this conversation with the client. It's because you've just done it so many times. And so you mentioned the bits of gold, and there's some client stories and so forth in there. There's people are all different, but they're all also kind of the same too. And so they're all on a similar kind of journey, and they all want to achieve similar kind of things in a slightly different way. And so when you've been doing something for nearly 20 years, you do find that in a roundabout way, you're saying the same kind of thing to different people over and over. And then that made writing the book quite easily. And then translating that to the stuff that I do online, the explaining of the different topics and so forth that I do. You've done that a million times in an office with a door closed and using a whiteboard. The challenging part for me, and the challenging part for a lot of other people that try to do things online, is then the confidence of recording your face, and do I really look like that, and does that what my voice sounds like, and but then again, it's just a repeat. After you've done it 500 times, it becomes pretty easy after time.
Look, I've seen your videos, I think, for a long time. Like I thought I've seen it, and I always thought it was the fact that you could be on a walk and then you have an idea pop into your mind, and then you had the one with the Lego set as well. Like it feels like you're able to understand what is the gold. I think sometimes when you're doing something over and over again, you may not actually understand what's gold because it's the norm. And when I see what you're explaining, I'm like, yeah, that is a good topic for people to know. And that's what this book is like. I feel you've actually understood what someone might want to know, as opposed to maybe, sometimes they can be so saturated with information. You've kept really true to that voice that we see online. And I guess that approach to the book, were you ever tempted to go any other direction than you did with this book?
No, I think I wanted to just keep it me. And so, I wanted it to be, I wanted people to be reading it thinking it sounds like James is reading this book to me, and I didn't read the audio book. So for those people that did,
I was disappointed with that, James.
But I wanted to be in that voice, and you like you mentioned, the videos with the Lego blocks and the videos walking. But because I've done so many videos, I have an idea of what will resonate with people and what won't. And then there's certain topics that you can explain in a certain way. And look, I'll have an idea running around in my head, and I'm thinking, well, I can just say this thing and record it to camera and post the video, or how can I help someone understand this a little bit easier? Because most people, when they see something visually, they'll pick it up a little bit easier than if it's just me saying something in the video. So then with certain topics, I'm thinking, well, how can I either draw that on a piece of paper and have a diagram to explain whatever I'm talking about, or do I need to use a prop like the Lego blocks? And so some of the video ideas that I have, they are rolling around in my head for a week or so. And even to the point that I'm saying into myself, okay, I'm going to use these Lego blocks, but I'm like, what am I going to say at the very start that there's going to interest someone in watching this video? Because there's so many different ways that I could say it. And if I lose someone in the beginning, well, they're not going to watch the video, so then they're not going to get the education that comes from it. And with all the videos that I put out, I can, I've got a bit of an understanding of what's going to work and what's not. Sometimes it's a complete surprise and something's a real flop when I thought it was going to be good, and vice versa. But it's just back to this kind of repeat. I've just done it so many times.
Yeah, I feel that you speak to, people coming up to retirement, people in my age group, like in your 40s. You've got kids, right?
Yeah.
And do you think you've captured the Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience?
It's surprising. Like, you can get some of the metrics on there about ages of people. But when my videos first started doing well on TikTok, and that was the audience was 50 plus mostly, and this is going back a couple of years ago, when back then I didn't think there were many 50 plus year olds on there. I thought it was 15-year-olds doing dancing videos, but most of the audience was 50 plus. And then you can see some of those metrics across the different platforms. Facebook, for example, is the oldest platform. The demographics of the people that you can see that are following, by far, it's the oldest one. So you can see some of that. But I kind of make an effort to try and talk to lots of different people. I'm doing videos about age pension that are really only relevant for people in their mid-60s and beyond. And then I did a video the other day, because going back to school and kids going back to school, and my son starting high school, about paying for high school fees and using an education bond. And that's probably only relevant for someone that's 40-ish, that kind of age bracket where I am. So some videos are for others, they're for different people, but it's just general education that I'm trying to put out there too, across the whole range.
And that's why you're a fantastic person to speak to for the Start Well podcast, because who we are envisioning that this is going out to with our listenership are, parents that have kids, maybe grandparents, aunties, uncles, but just really wanting to engage in conversations with the young people in their life, so they hear concepts, and it might be, yes, this makes sense to me, but it's that next step of how does it make sense for someone younger? When you translate the goal that comes out in the office into goal that happens at home, how does that work for your family?
For my family, so the big thing, and I get asked this online, and I actually need to talk about this a little bit more online myself. People are asking, like, how can I kind of educate my kids? How can I teach my kids about money? And look, I do it for a job, and my kids make jokes about, no, you're always talking about this thing and that thing, and so they kind of hear it. But the big thing that my wife and I, we don't shy away from having money conversations around our kids, whether we're saving up for something, or whether we're saying, that's too expensive, or we've, for example, like the house that we're in, that we live in, we knocked down an old house and we built a new house. If my eldest son's at school at the moment, but he could walk in the room here and he'd be able to tell you how much we paid for this house, what it cost us, and how much money. Like he asks, they'll ask about, how much money is in the bank account? How much money have you got in the bank account? And we'll tell them. I don't have any hesitation in telling them how much money's in the bank account. And so we're not shying away from money conversations around our kids. I talked to them about, there was at one stage, it was only a month or two ago, I was driving with my eldest son in the car, and it was some conversation came up about superannuation, and I was trying to explain it to him, and he's like, oh, hang on, Dad, I think I've got it. And he rattled off like what the whole point of super about this saving up money so that I have something to live off when I retire and I stop getting paid from my work. And I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. I'm like, if only I had the camera recording then and got it. So that's kind of what we're doing in our household is just, my kids hear me recording videos. My kids, will hear meetings and things that I'm doing when I'm at home and they're on school holidays. But then just the general, things that my wife and I talk about, with things that we're doing in our own life, we don't do that behind closed doors. The kids, if they're at the dinner table and we're having the conversation, they're at the dinner table. And so they're kind of just learning that way. And then I've started a share account for my eldest son now, and so he's adding some money into that kind of thing to start to learn about compound growth and investing in the share market and all the rest of it. But, that's where we're heading now.
Yeah. And on that topic of compounding, I liked the way that you talked about compounding. Compounding will be a concept that will appear in most finance books when you're going to go through it, because it's such an important aspect of things. And you were talking about the cost of delaying, right? I think you said what you're giving up is a year in the future. And I said, I've not actually heard it being represented that way. I guess with the value of compounding and you speaking to your kids about it, like you said, they're talking about shares and compounding. What has that conversation been like you at home around the importance of starting early and the whys?
Yeah. So it's like my kids have their, their iPads and all of these kind of things. Like they're surrounded by, we drive a Tesla car. One of our cars is a Tesla. And so they're kind of surrounded by these names that are then, you can go and buy these shares. And so part of it is to say, we set up an index investment for my son that it goes into. And so what I was explaining to him is we put the first few $100s in there when it got set up. And say, okay, you now, this iPhone that I have here, you now own some shares of Apple. And so the people that then go out and buy a new iPhone tomorrow morning, you're a part owner of that business and you get part of the profits from it. And so it's what I'm trying to do there is trying to connect with them this thing that you can't touch and you can't feel. It's this share. It's what is it? It's this kind of made up thing. It almost seems like. But kind of connecting it to, well, what is it actually doing in the world? This car that we've got in the driveway that we paid for and we maintain and so forth. Someone started that business that sold us that car that we've then bought, and then the business makes a profit and you then own some of the shares. So I'm starting kind of there with that is this, you're actually owning part of these things that we're actually buying day in, day out. It's not just out in the some made up world. But then when you come back to the compounding, both of my kids love their maths. I think they probably get it from me. And so now this wouldn't be appropriate for some households, but we've spoken about like earning interest. So you have $100 and you earn 5% interest. So you earned $5, but then kind of going to, well, then next year I've got $105 and I earn 5%. And so I still earn my same $5, but then I earn a little bit on the $5, and both of my kids, just having that conversation with them, it clicked with them, and different kids will pick that up in different ways and at different ages. But so then they've got this idea of, okay, well, I've earned $1, but now next year I'm earning $1 on the $1 that I earned last year, and it grows. And so that then leads through to that graphic that you were talking about that's in the book. I don't kind of remember where I got that from. I saw that somewhere, and I'm like, that's the best explanation of compounding that I've ever heard. People think, you delay it a year, you're missing out on the 5% return next year. Well, yes, you are. But what you're really missing out on is that magic right in those last few years where the returns are a whole lot higher.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing. It's kind of like flipping the very known concepts, because I think sometimes people can get fatigued by financial concepts being thrown at them. Yeah. And the thing about parents as well, particularly women, they're feeling this concept of this mental load. Like, so you're saying if I don't have these money conversations at home, then that's another thing I'm feeling at being a parent. Like, it's definitely something that is more prevalent in women, and it just becomes not having the space to do that because they're so overloaded already. If you think about breaking down one simple thing that you could do, because this is not meant to make anyone feel bad that they're not having these conversations. It's more about things that you can actually use moving forward. What would you say is something that's a really good starting conversation with your young person that's not going to take too much time for you to prepare, to stress over?
Yep. Yeah. And look, I think I appreciate that, I'm in this kind of position that explaining some of these topics to my kids, I know about it. And so there's a whole lot of parents out there that they don't know the topics in the first place. So how the hell are they supposed to possibly, educate their kids around it? And I completely understand that. But I'd just start with the things that you do know. And I'd start with this idea of money coming in and money coming out of our household. I think that'd be the very first starting point, is to, this house that you live in, and we paying off a mortgage or renting or whatever the living arrangements might be, is like, how does all of this happen? Now, they know mum goes to work or dad goes to work, or mum and dad both go to work, or whatever the arrangement might be. And then kind of then helping to draw the dots for the kids to say, okay, mum goes to work, I drop you off at school and I go to work, and there's this money that comes into our bank account, and maybe you want to tell your kids how much that is, maybe you don't. That's up to you in your household. And then explain, well, then all of the, there's money comes in, tax gets taken out first, we get what's left, and then we live with what's left over. If you are paying off a mortgage and so forth, I'd then encourage you to try and explain to your children this idea of borrowing money from the bank, and then that you have to repay that money. So not only do you have to repay the money that you borrowed from them, but there's this thing called interest that you have to pay the bank back. The privilege of them lending you money means that you have to pay them the money back plus a little bit more every month to pay off that loan. That was a challenging conversation just in my household as well. And I do this for a day job, trying to explain. I was saying before, my eldest son would be able to tell you how much this house cost us, that we borrowed this money from the bank, and they're saying, well, can't you just work for however many years and pay it back? I said, well, yes, but we have to pay back what we borrowed and then some, trying to get them to understand that interest bit, that we actually have to pay it back extra. That was tougher than explaining you own some shares in Apple and the new iPhone it makes a profit for you.
Yeah. And I think that's what is so great about your book, right? I think if someone in their 40s or 50s reads it, and it flows down to conversations that can happen with the kids.
Yeah.
And if you get a concept, and you've said a number of times in the book, you can come back to this. Like, you're not expected to get everything that I'm talking about right now. Is for you to come back to it. And you've got all your diagrams in the book. So I would say to our listeners as well, is that reading this book, it might talk about retirement, and it talks about retirement as what we more traditionally know it as. And we know that the kids' world, the world that they are stepping into, is different in terms of retirement assumptions, their goals, things like that. But the key concepts of money management, you talk about the tax system. I really enjoyed the way that you talked about businesses and their option with tax and the incentive they have around that and how that generates jobs. I thought that, that's something I would steal to just say in the car. Just, steal a line, say in the car, like, so I came up with it. But moving through your books, so listeners, if you engage with the book, there will be snippets for you to take in, like the way that James is explaining it in a way that you're going to get it. I think is actually quite transferable to kids. I'm also approaching as a parent.
Yeah, I agree. And so lots of people ask me when I said that I was writing it, I'm 5 years away from retirement. Is it too late? I'm already retired. Is it too late? Or I'm 25 years old. Is this thing appropriate for me? And I've purposely written it in a way that the 25-year-old can pick it up and still learn a whole lot. And it might just help them with the decisions that they're making for the next 40 years of their working life, however long it might be. It's not just for someone that's knocking on the door of retirement. Because there's this whole kind of, the middle section of the book is this whole education of how does the financial system in Australia work? Taxes, super, trusts, companies, whether you're 60 years old or whether you're 20 years old, it's a good idea that you know some of this information, and so you'll pick up things, doesn't matter what your age.
Yeah, and Australia's superannuation system is complex. The financial system as a whole is complex. So it's not a surprise that people don't get it. We talk about financial literacy scores. They are quite low, but beyond financial literacy is actually financial capability, and that's being able to actually apply these concepts in a positive way. Research has shown that experience is the best way for young people to embed good money habits. And you're talking about the conversations happening at home. So I think it's one thing to have. It doesn't seem like knowledge is everything. It's the fact that applying it seems to be everything. If you apply it, that's the way it's going to work.
Yeah, and that's it. Look, we live in this world where knowledge used to be the thing. You would go and pay the professional because they knew about this thing that you wanted to understand, and you were paying for the access to that knowledge. With the internet, knowledge is free now. You go onto ChatGPT and it'll tell you whatever it is that you want to know, and it's probably mostly right. You need to be careful of it, but it's the applying of it and the doing and the taking the action. That's the bit that most people get stuck with now, whereas in the past it was, okay, I don't even know this information, and so I need to pay someone to tell me this information. You can get all of the information that's in the book, you can find that on the internet. So there's nothing new in there that isn't already online. It's then the next step, exactly as you said, applying that to your situation and doing something about it now that you know this information.
Yeah, and this sense of longevity, you've mentioned longevity in the book, and it is increasing consideration when it comes to retirement planning, right? But as our kids are moving in, one of the books that we have reviewed previously, that's in episode 2, that will come out, The 100-Year Life, which talks about really the longevity issues. And what we know retirement now is, you talk about 3 phases of retirement, but generally when you're looking at the 3-stage life, it's your education, employment, and then retirement. But there's a sense that with our kids and their life expectancy and living to above 100, they're calling it a multi-phase life, where they'll almost like come back to things and retrain in things, and it's not one career and it's not one way of doing things. I guess how aware do you think people are about the changing concepts that are happening right now for young people? Because the world they're stepping into is going to be different in the future from what we have based a lot of our assumptions around.
Exactly, and I think it's people underestimate how long they're likely to live for, and so I talk about in the book, and you talk about in the work that we do, and the work that you would do, you would be having similar conversations that someone retiring around about now in a 60 or thereabouts, there's a very high likelihood that they'll live another 30 plus years. But then as time goes on, that also extends. And so the 60-year-old now, there's a fair chance that some of those 60-year-olds will probably be nudging 100. And so then when you think about, my parents died in their early 80s or something, my mum died at 81 and dad died at 82, I've got 20 years ahead of me. It's like, well, you probably don't, barring some major, medical crisis or, something, unforeseen. If you just kind of continue on in reasonable health, you're 30, 40 years. And so that's a long period of time that you need to plan for financially, but you also need to plan for just in life in general. So, well, what are you going to do during that time? And so I think it will become more and more common that, we're already seeing it, that people chopping and changing jobs and changing careers and going back to uni and, studying later in life. And that's happening so much now. We'll all know 40-year-olds and 30 and 40-year-olds that are going back to uni and studying part-time at night time and whatever for other careers. I think that's going to happen more and more. And so I think we'll end up with people just working longer, hopefully not because they need to financially. If they've been just smart over their working lives, they've got themselves into a position where they don't desperately need to keep working, but they're just doing it because life is a really long time for a lot of people. You don't want to be sitting in your chair for 40 years doing nothing. And we hear from a lot of clients that eventually they get over the traveling overseas and the holidays and so forth. There's only so many times that they want to go back to visit the Eiffel Tower. They've seen it enough times. What's next? And so that brings in this conversation of all, what's your purpose in life and who do you want to surround yourself with and what's going to keep you motivated and keep your mind going. So there's 2 parts to this longevity thing. It's having the money to be able to live a fulfilling life for a very long period of time without necessarily needing to go to work, but then also thinking about what is going to fulfill your life if you're not having to set the alarm at 6:30 in the morning to get up and go to work every day.
Yeah, and it's also that sense of adaptability, which in the 100-year life, they talk about the fact that younger people are actually naturally more equipped to being more curious and exploring and, thinking about satisfaction, which probably sometimes, gets on our nerves as parents because you're like, no, stick to this. But in that book, they also talk about people in their 40s being caught up with this idea that we are going to experience a 3-stage life, but we're actually going to need a multi, so in a way, we have been caught up with the ideas of our parents, but we're needing to actually guide our kids with different ideas from that, which I know I found really confronting, even as an advisor, even though I know about longevity. It was like, I need to almost challenge myself. And then from challenging myself, then I need to speak to the kids about it. I don't know, do you feel similarly that you might be trapped between two different concepts, or you've kind of floated pretty easily?
You're making me worry that I need to start having different conversations with my kids because, but look, we see it's prevalent a lot with the 40-something-year-olds that I work with, them working towards this idea of being work optional is what I want to describe it as. So you're describing this kind of 3 stages: education, work, and then retire. The vast majority of 40-something-year-olds that I talk to, they're scared of the idea that, okay, I'd quit work on Friday and then that's it. They might have this great big pile of assets and they can afford it, but what are they going to do with their time? But then they also feeling trapped in, okay, I need to, they're in that kind of more expensive years of their life, raising a young family, paying a mortgage, their parents maybe getting a little bit elderly and might be needing to provide a little bit more support to their parents. And so they're kind of trapped in that really, really, really busy time. It does slow down for them over time, but kind of working towards this work optional period. And so that's kind of the 40-year-olds, but the people that are 20 now and, the 10 and 11-year-olds, then my kids' ages, it's going to be completely different again. And what it looks like, who knows? We'll see. But I'm with you. It's going to be this chopping and changing, and they're going to need to be more adaptable than what my parents have had to be, than what I'm having to be. It's going to be another level again.
Yeah. On the next episode, we have Glenn James on, right? And he has his book with investing, and he talks about the importance of the first job. And I talked about this with Jenny Rolfe Wallace as well in our first episode, because I'm very aware, especially for girls and feminized professions where they're paid less. I talked to my kids about my daughter, and just said, you need to really find something that's practical because I said you can enjoy yourself and have fun, but I am aware of how important it is for you to build early on, so things compound for you, like the benefit compounds for you, and then you have choice.
Yes.
But of course, it's not like parenting is not the same for every child. It's not the same for every household. I feel like I'm a bit harsh in the assessment, but I'm coming from the point of view that I've seen the statistics for women. It's not great. As the statistics already stand now with superannuation and women's balances being a lot less than men, but having a longer life expectancy. If longevity here we know longevity is extending out. I just feel like it's so much more important for our young women to understand the opportunity cost of going one career pathway over another. You know, so I was surprised to read what Glenn had put in there, because I thought maybe I'm Asian, a little bit more pragmatic on that. But Glenn's, what are your views with kids utilizing those opportunities early on?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer of my kids will do what they do, and I've got 2 boys, and so that boys versus girls thing where all the stats and everything are, absolutely, females living longer, less in retirement savings and so forth. But they'll kind of do what they'll do, and I hope they kind of make best use of the opportunities that we might afford them. What I'm seeing in practice, though, and with this conversation coming up a bit in some of the people that I'm talking to, there's one particular conversation that comes to mind. There was one lady that I was talking to that was talking about all the statistics about females typically earning less and having lower super balances and so forth. And she's like looking at that saying, that's horrifying for me. I want to do something about that to help my daughter. And so what she's actively doing is contributing money to her daughter's super fund, and will do that from a younger age. She has no intention of continuing on, but she's talking about trying to get her over this hump of, if she goes down that kind of more traditional path of, she has a child and then she takes some time off work and then she works part-time before she eventually goes back to full-time work. That's still in Australia, that's mostly female-driven rather than male-driven at this stage. And so she was kind of actively contributing money to her daughter's super fund. I can't remember if she had a son as well, but actively contributing money to her daughter's super fund in her mind to get her over that hump, that period of time out of the workforce, or working less, whatever occupation she ends up in, that it doesn't impact her quite so much in the long run. That if she can help load up her daughter's super fund to begin with, the magic of compounding, what we were talking about before, the magic of compounding will get her over that period of time, and then still have a typical male type balance when it comes to her retirement years. Because you fast forward that there's all these statistics around the kind of growing population of single women in retirement and homeless and so forth. It just amplifies it all even more at the other end. So all the more reason to bring it back to your kind of question, all the more reason to be having these conversations around it does matter what job you go into, as to certain occupations are going to have a ceiling on what you can earn. It is what it is, and you need to kind of accept that. And if you go down that path, that's where you're going to be limited, versus there are other occupations where the ceiling might be a whole lot higher.
Yeah, and I feel maybe I'm more direct with my daughter because I look at those stats a lot and they trouble me. And I see where she's at. I can think about my 3 kids, and my eldest one has intuitively held on to money concepts very quickly, and he's interested to know the whys. My daughter's like, just do it for me, right? But if I ask her for the concepts, I think that's the problem that I have, knowing that the research says that it's about financial experience. I love the idea of contributing, and in your book you talk about government co-contributing while they're working as well. So like let's say, listeners, please just get the book and read it. But I'm more the worry of if you don't actually take on these lessons and navigating it, it's going to flow on to their own lives. Because even if you're building up a super balance, like for example, the divorce rate is 1 in 2, right? 50% of relationships end in divorce. If women have given up their ability to earn income, that means that when they're restarting, even when they get child support and then the kids are above 18, it's harder for them to gain ground, harder for them to keep maybe the family house if there's a large mortgage. These sort of things like have a knock-on effect. We talk about compounding. I always say that this compounding is a beautiful thing for investing, but there's almost like a negative compounding effect for the decisions that happen to women. Yep. So I think I was just kind of exploring your thoughts around that, because it just seems like we can talk about things generally, but then when we start breaking it down to stats on how people turn out at this point, I just wonder how we can do things differently with young people.
Yeah, it's like I guess the important thing is all of these things matter. Like you can easily kind of brush it under the carpet and say, you'll work it out, you'll find your way and so forth. But it matters, and in the moment it doesn't matter. But then before you know it, you wake up and you're 30 years old, and like similar to these the decisions around, in your early 20s, you're going around and on holidays and having a great time and really enjoying your life and spending all of the money you earn. If I reflect on my own situation, I didn't save terribly much money during my early 20s. But then you kind of bring it to these decisions around what path you go down from an employment perspective will dictate what you can earn. There is a limit to how much you can reduce your cost. You need clothes, you need food, you need to live somewhere that's going to cost something. You can't reduce that too much, but there's no limit to what you can earn. Certain occupations will have a ceiling, but for example, if you own your own business doing whatever it is, the sky's the limit. There's no limit on how much you can earn, but there is a limit on how much you can cut your expenses. And so I think maybe helping children understand that it's that difference between what you're earning and what you're spending. That's the money that will help you get ahead. And if you go down a path where your ability to earn an income is limited in some way, shape or form, well, then it's going to be holding you back. The same kind of philosophy, I heard it spoken about when it comes to property, and I didn't realize it until too late, and I didn't know what I know back then. But that first property that you buy really matters as well. Like if you go and buy a property that unfortunately doesn't increase in value for whatever reason, and you live there for 5 years or 10 years, and then everything surrounding you has gone up, you're back to exactly what you're saying before. It's this kind of compounding in reverse to a degree, and you're forever playing catch up. So that first big purchase that you make, when it comes to the property, that needs to do well also. And I see it in the work that I do, the difference between people that got into that earlier on and they've benefited from some growth versus those that either got in earlier on and it didn't work out well for them, or they spent their 20s and into their 30s having a good time, and then they're trying to deal with it later on in life. It's much harder to catch up. These decisions you make matter.
Yeah, and you talk about this in the book, and I find it's a handy conversation, I think, to have at home, this concept of property versus shares, and how people, can be scared to, for example, be in shares, and they think that's risky, and then borrow to be in shares, but they'll borrow a very large amount to go into property. And
Yes.
as we know now, the sense, like in my offices, it might be similar for yours. People come in saying they're worried about whether their kids can get into the property market. What you're talking about in the book is that people can still get into investing in small amounts and actually start now.
Yes.
Even if it's not property, because you could use shares. Like, it's not financial advice, it's a disclaimer, but you're talking about the concept that it's not like all or nothing. I thought that was such an important conversation, especially for young people now that are feeling so hopeless around being locked out of the market.
Yeah.
How would you translate it, maybe for our listeners, as our last kind of concept that they could maybe talk at home, or maybe for them to consider, because parents could be saying, you need to get property. They could be putting that pressure. How would you maybe reimagine this concept between property and shares and young people building for the future?
Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure in a lot of households to say, you got to buy property, buy it as soon as you can. And that argument's, probably fairly valid with what's happened with property prices over the last 20, 30 years. The sooner you bought that property, generally the better you've ended up financially. But that gap is just so large now, but to try and get into it, and there's a whole lot of government grants around 5% deposits and all of these kind of things, and there'll continue to be some level of government support to try and help people into their first home. But that gap is just so big, and it's this compounding working against you. Unfortunately, you've got a $700,000-800,000 home, whatever much that home might cost you. That going up at 4 or 5 or 6% per annum on a big asset, the compounding just magnifies that $700,000 asset. Before you know it, it's $1 million, and you can't. There's very few people out there that can possibly save at a fast enough rate to get the deposit together and combat this increasing price at the same time. And so then you need to look at other things that are going to help you at least try and keep up with that price rise, so that you can do your saving, and then that the money that you're in on average is roughly keeping up with that growth rate. And that's where this kind of shares versus property thing starts out. So if you can save a bucket load of money, or if someone's been generous and giving you some money to buy to put down a deposit, great, go for your life, buy the property. But for a lot of people, that's not the reality. And so then you need to, the next best alternative is looking at the share market and setting up some type of regular, what we describe as dollar cost averaging, but a certain amount of money every month, rain, hail or shine, you're just putting it away and putting it away and putting it away. And now if buying a property is high on your list of priorities, hopefully you can build that over time through your savings and some returns that it eventually gets you there. But also, it's okay that if you don't quite get there as well, because you've done something, you built this other asset over time that, build it big enough, it will pay you an income to live off to replace the income that you're earning from your work. And there may be, and there's plenty of people that haven't been able to afford to buy a house, and that might be an increasing thing going forward. Who knows, what the next 10 to 20 years brings in terms of the property market. But because the important thing is you can't afford to just not do anything and say, it's so far out of reach, I can't get there, so forget it, I'm off to Europe again next year. Well, no, that's not the answer. You got to do something. You got to do something else. And the 50-year-old you would love it if you managed to build a $2 million share portfolio. And if you didn't have a house at that same time, okay, but you got a $2 million share portfolio that's going to be growing for you, providing an income, and that can help pay for the next stage of your life.
And I think that is, I'm just going to challenge our listeners to take that conversation back. I think it requires you to maybe reflect on your own conversations you're having maybe with kids or young people around property. But I say if you get to that chapter in James's book, it kind of outlines, in a really easy way to understand how you can still get into investing and not actually feel that you're not being able to move forward. So anyway, James, I definitely recommend this book. It's a fantastic book to engage in, and it's just, even though it's talking about retirement, there are concepts that you can bring home to have with your kids. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with before we end off with our podcast today?
No, I think the last thing would just be to just don't shy away from money conversations. You might know a lot about it. You might not know much at all. There's books like mine that you've mentioned. There's other books that you've mentioned throughout the podcast, but you can read some of these things. Lots of people have bought my book and then gone and bought a copy for their 20-year-old son or daughter, just to help kind of educate them. And so if you can learn some of these things, have the conversations around home, just talk about whatever it is that you do know about the ins and outs of money and the Australian financial system. Just have those conversations around your kids. It's better than nothing. And, there's plenty of other resources out there as well to help you and help educate them.
Very wise words there from James. In the show notes, we will put in links to how you can access James' content and the book, Retire Life Ready. You should get it if you haven't got it already. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode, James.
Thanks, Dawn. Thanks for having me.
In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Start Well and investing in the financial empowerment of young people. Please refer to the show notes for resources and links discussed in this episode. Subscribe now to get notified of the latest episodes as they drop weekly. And visit us on the Wealth Designer Start Well page for further resources to continue your knowledge journey.